Hello. Today General Hospital will reveal the unfolding drama at General Hospital is escalating into one of the most emotionally devastating and legally complex events the town of Port Charles has seen in years, centered around a seemingly reckless act that has unraveled into a web of obsession, betrayal, fractured relationships, and irreversible consequences. Giovanni "Gio" Palmieri, once a peripheral figure searching for direction and identity, now finds himself on the brink of complete ruin. Not just because of the crime he may have committed, but because of the man who might be forced to bring him to justice, his own father, Dante Falconeri. This is not merely a story of a break-in, it is the tragic collision of law and blood, where loyalty and ethics are locked in a slow, devastating duel. And at the center of it all stands Emma Scorpio Drake. A brilliant but dangerously idealistic young woman whose quest to uncover a hidden truth may have set in motion a chain of events she can no longer control. Emma has always carried the weight of her legacy as the child of two of Port Charles's most celebrated figures. Her mother, Robin, was a genius in the world of medicine. Her father, Patrick, a revered surgeon. But instead of simply following in their footsteps, Emma has decided to make her own mark. One defined by conviction and fearlessness, but now veering sharply into reckless rebellion. Her obsession began innocently enough, a suspicion that Professor Hank Dalton, a respected but secretive researcher, was conducting unauthorized and cruel experiments behind the closed doors of his private laboratory. But suspicion soon turned into compulsion. Unable to obtain any official clearance or gain support from her peers or mentors, Emma took matters into her own hands. She devised a plan to expose what she believed was a humanitarian crime, and in doing so, she crossed a line no medical student should ever approach. Using charm and calculated deceit, Emma managed to steal a master keycard from Vaughn, an unsuspecting staff member who had no idea he had just handed over unfettered access to one of the hospital's most secure and ethically sensitive zones. With the keycard in her possession, Emma was no longer a student with suspicions. She was a vigilante with the tools to invade, expose, and disrupt. However, she knew her presence at the site of the break-in would raise alarm bells, especially if she conveniently disappeared during Professor Dalton's much-anticipated lecture. It was then that she turned to Gio, a young man who had quietly admired her from afar, a boy desperately seeking purpose, validation, and perhaps a deeper connection with someone who made him feel seen. Gio, without the resources, training, or understanding of the risks, volunteered to carry out Emma's plan. Perhaps it was his way of proving something, to Emma, to himself, to a world that had always treated him like a footnote. What he didn't realize was that he had been cast in a role far larger and far more dangerous than he could handle. The plan was simple in theory but disastrous in execution. Gio would use the keycard to infiltrate the lab while Emma provided a convincing alibi by sitting front and center at Dalton's lecture. What neither of them fully accounted for was the sophistication of the hospital's security systems, which included motion sensors, biometric alerts, time-locked security doors, and a direct link to the Port Charles Police Department for any breach deemed high risk. As Gio slipped into the dim, sterile corridors of the restricted research wing, each footstep echoed like a warning bell in the silence. The clinical atmosphere, the eerie hum of machines, and the palpable absence of life only amplified his unease. He had no idea what he was looking for, no photographs, no documentation, no evidence of wrongdoing, only a vague directive from Emma to find something that would justify their fears. But time was running out. Every second inside the lab without authorization increased the chances of triggering the security failsafe. And when that alert came, it arrived swiftly and without mercy. The lab lockdown was immediate, blaring sirens echoing through the corridors, red lights flashing like a pulsating heartbeat of the facility's disapproval. Doors slammed shut. Surveillance systems blinked to life. And the call went out to the police department. Assigned to respond, Detective Dante Falconeri. Dante had no idea what awaited him at the hospital. He had been briefed about a lab breach, an unidentified suspect, and potential corporate espionage. But as he raced through the halls of General Hospital, gun holstered and badge in hand, nothing could have prepared him for the heartbreak of discovering his own son, the child he had spent years disconnected from, the young man he was just beginning to build a fragile rapport with. Standing in the center of a crime scene, holding a stolen access card, eyes wide with fear and betrayal. The moment their eyes met, a tidal wave of emotions surged through both of them: shock, disbelief, anger, disappointment, and something even heavier, dread. Dante froze, torn between instinct and training. His partner called out protocols. Gio tried to explain. But none of it mattered. The entire world shrunk to the square footage of that lab and the crushing realization that the man sworn to uphold the law might now be forced to punish the very person he brought into this world. It was a moment that would define them both forever. For Dante, the moral conundrum was immediate and paralyzing. Arresting Gio would mean severing any possibility of reconciliation. Letting him go would compromise every principle Dante had dedicated his life to. He saw in Joe's eyes not a hardened criminal, but a confused, manipulated boy, someone who had been led astray by a cause he didn't even understand. But the law was not designed to distinguish between naivete and malice. The law demanded consequence, regardless of intent. Yet here was a father, a detective, a man split down the middle by roles that were no longer compatible. Gio, meanwhile, stood in stunned silence, realizing the full scope of what he had done. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't even a rebel. He was a pawn, and a foolish one at that. Used by Emma, discarded by protocol, and now laid bare before a man he barely trusted. The sting of betrayal was sharpest not from Emma, but from the man in uniform who now looked at him with pained resolve. For the first time, Gio understood the cost of hero worship, the myth of noble causes and self-righteous missions. All of it had led him here, in handcuffs, surrounded by flashing lights and whispered accusations. Emma, informed of the arrest minutes later, was confronted with a truth she could no longer ignore. Her crusade had gone too far. Her silence was complicity. If she stepped forward now, she could take responsibility and share the blame. But doing so would mean destroying her academic future, facing legal consequences, and admitting to herself that she had used Gio as a human shield. The choice loomed before her: cowardice or accountability. As the fallout begins, the entire hospital reels from the revelation. Vaughn is suspended pending investigation. Professor Dalton is forced into a public defense of his research. Emma faces a disciplinary hearing. Gio awaits possible charges. And Dante, torn apart by guilt and anger, begins to question whether the law he serves has any room left for mercy. Port Charles will never forget the night the son of a detective trespassed in the name of righteousness, nor the silent, tormented look of a father forced to choose between justice and blood. This was more than a break-in. This was a reckoning, and it's only the beginning. If Dante is forced to arrest Gio and take him into custody, the impact would go far beyond the cold legality of the act. It would be a catastrophic emotional implosion for both father and son, severing what was already a fragile, hesitant, and painfully recent attempt at reconciliation. For Gio, the handcuffs would symbolize more than just the consequences of breaking the law. They would symbolize final confirmation that Dante, the man whose absence haunted his childhood and whose uniform always came before family, would never truly choose him. Every unresolved wound of abandonment, every silent plea for acknowledgement, every tiny hope that maybe, just maybe, his father would stand by him unconditionally would be shattered in that instant. It wouldn't matter if Dante's hands trembled as he clasped the cuffs, or if his voice cracked with guilt as he read Gio his rights. The symbolic weight of the act would be irreversible. In Joe's eyes, it would not be a detective doing his job. It would be a father failing his son one final, unforgivable time. The public nature of the arrest would only amplify the humiliation. Whispers would travel through the hospital corridors, social media would circulate the footage, and even the other students, many of whom already viewed Gio as a misfit, would see him as a criminal. But more painful than the headlines or the stigma would be the emotional implosion between father and son. Gio, who had barely begun to allow Dante back into his life, would recoil into a shell of bitterness and distrust. He would not see Dante's actions as the inevitable response of a man of law, but as a conscious betrayal, a choice to prioritize principles over personal connection. Any progress they made in building their relationship would vanish, leaving nothing but a chasm of silence and resentment. But should Dante take the other route? Should he choose to cover up Joe's involvement, manipulate the report, erase the security footage, or simply turn a blind eye, it would trigger a different kind of implosion. While Gio may feel protected in the short term, the long-term consequences would be just as devastating. Dante's identity, so intricately woven into his commitment to justice, would begin to corrode. He would be haunted not only by the illegality of his actions but by the erosion of the core values that once defined him. A man who had spent years holding the line, refusing to compromise, would have finally crossed it. His reputation with his colleagues, people like Jordan, Chase, and Anna, would begin to fray. Doubt would shadow every future case he touched. Whispers of favoritism, of hypocrisy, of moral failure would follow him wherever he went. He wouldn't just be a father protecting a child, he'd be a cop compromising an institution. This internal moral collapse would manifest in every aspect of Dante's life. His sleep would be punctuated by the imagined sound of sirens and the memory of Joe's eyes filled with confusion and pain. His relationships would suffer under the weight of secrets. And the knowledge that he set a precedent that said justice could be suspended when it got too personal, would gnaw at him until there was nothing left of the man he once was. In sparing Gio from one set of consequences, he may very well condemn both of them to another. And Emma, brilliant, driven, and increasingly tormented, would not emerge from this unscathed. If Gio is arrested, her world will shatter under the pressure of self-recrimination. It was her idea. Her plan. Her key. She sent him into the fire while she stayed behind, cloaked in respectability. No matter what her intentions were, the reality is that she used someone who cared for her as a pawn in a war she had no right to wage alone. The guilt would be insidious and relentless, taking root in the cracks of her conscience and blooming into sleepless nights, lost focus, and emotional disintegration. She would begin to question everything, her sense of right and wrong, her judgment, her ability to lead, to heal, to care. Her academic path, once pristine and glowing with promise, would now be littered with the shards of an ambition that got too close to obsession. Professors would ask questions. Disciplinary boards would convene. Her mentors, people like Elizabeth, Finn, and Portia, would express disappointment that cut deeper than any official punishment. But beyond the academic consequences would be the personal reckoning. Could she live with herself knowing that Gio might go to prison, not because of his own beliefs or crusade, but because he tried to impress her? Because he wanted to matter to her? Would she admit her role? Confess everything? Or would she continue to hide behind half-truths, telling herself that she never forced Joe's hand, never promised him anything? The weight of that rationalization would follow her for the rest of her life. But perhaps the most chilling possibility lies in what Gio might discover inside the lab. If he evades detection, if he manages to bypass the security, and if he stumbles upon something truly horrific, classified files, unauthorized experiments, subjects hidden away from oversight, then everything changes. The narrative explodes beyond a disciplinary case at a hospital and becomes a global scandal. Suppose Gio finds a series of encrypted files detailing gene editing on human embryos, or proof that the facility has been running covert pharmacological trials on patients without their consent. Suppose he finds something worse, the physical evidence of abuse. Patients in medically induced comas, children hidden from the public eye, surgical programs operating under falsified approvals. Suddenly, Emma's instincts are validated, but the victory would be hollow. The truth would come at the cost of Joe's trauma, Dante's honor, and Emma's soul. A federal investigation would descend upon General Hospital. News vans would line the street. Whistleblower protections might be offered, but they wouldn't erase the scars. Dalton would go on the offensive, claiming the data was misinterpreted, that the intruders compromised patient confidentiality. Lawsuits would fly. The board would be paralyzed in chaos. And in the middle of the maelstrom would be three people, each broken in their own way by a single decision. If Gio goes public, he becomes a hero to some, a criminal to others. He may be praised by advocacy groups but blacklisted from future employment. The justice system might charge him for the break-in before granting immunity. He may never escape the label of the kid who exposed General Hospital, not in Port Charles, not in any medical institution, not in any professional sphere. Emma, should she confess her role, might be lauded for courage, but she would never again be allowed to operate in a hospital without scrutiny. Her dream of becoming a doctor like her parents might die before it began. And Dante? No matter what he does, the stain remains. If he covers it up, he loses himself. If he makes the arrest, he loses his son. If he tries to walk the line, file the report but argue for leniency, he may be drowned in red tape and political maneuvering. In the end, this is not just a story about crime or justice. It's about the fragile line between idealism and destruction. It's about how the pursuit of truth can burn everything it touches. It's about how love, be it paternal, romantic, or ideological, can lead us to ruin if we let it blind us to consequences. What began as a secret mission driven by belief has metastasized into a tragedy in motion. And by the time the dust settles, no one, least of all Gio, Dante, or Emma, will emerge from the ruins untouched. No matter how the events ultimately unfold, one truth remains inescapable. This incident will serve as an irreversible catalyst, altering the fragile, delicate fabric of the relationship between Gio Palmieri and his father, Dante Falconeri, forever. It is no longer simply a matter of right or wrong, innocence or guilt, but of what remains when love is tested under the crushing weight of responsibility and exposed to the harsh light of betrayal, duty, and consequence. For Gio and Dante, this will not just be remembered as the night of a break-in. It will become the moment everything shifted. Whatever tenuous bridge they were beginning to build will either be strengthened by mutual confrontation and forgiveness or shattered completely by silence, mistrust, and the irreversible damage caused by decisions made under pressure. For Dante, this ordeal is not merely about enforcing the law. It is about coming to terms with a truth he has spent years avoiding. That being a good man, a good cop, and a good father are often three roles in permanent conflict. The lines between them have always been blurred, but now they are colliding. In arresting Gio, he upholds the law but wounds his son. In protecting Gio, he shields his child but sacrifices his values, his reputation, and potentially his badge. The man who has spent his life defining himself by honor is now forced to consider whether honor must yield to blood, whether justice can be flexible in the face of love, and whether redemption is still possible for a father who once abandoned his child and now stands poised to either betray him again or break every rule he once swore to uphold. And for Gio, this event will become the crucible in which his identity is forged. Until now, he has lived with a fractured sense of self. A boy abandoned by his father, overlooked by society, drifting through life in search of meaning and belonging. But this moment changes everything. Whether he ends up behind bars, hailed as a whistleblower, or quietly swept under the rug, Gio will never be the same. He will no longer be the boy who blindly followed Emma, who waited for Dante to step up, who sought affection through sacrifice. Instead, he will be a man shaped by betrayal, by harsh lessons about consequence and loyalty, by the knowledge that even love can be weaponized and ideals can be dangerous when divorced from accountability. The scar of this incident, legal, emotional, moral, will become a defining part of who he is, and how he moves forward in a world that no longer offers easy absolution. As for Emma, her fall from grace will be far more internal than external. She may not be arrested. She may not even be expelled. But she will face something more difficult than punishment, the realization that her pursuit of justice, while noble in spirit, was fatally flawed in execution. She will come to see that idealism without empathy is a weapon, and that morality without reflection can be just as destructive as malice. She used Geo, not maliciously, perhaps not even consciously, but she did. She sent him into danger. She stood by while he risked everything. And even if her suspicions about Professor Dalton prove correct, even if her mission results in revelations that shake the hospital to its core, she will be haunted by the question of whether the truth was worth the cost of someone else's future. She will have to learn that justice is not just about exposing lies, but about owning the consequences of one's own truths. That in a world where most secrets are buried behind locked doors, real courage isn't just breaking in. It's staying behind and facing what comes next. And what comes next may be darker, more intricate, and more dangerous than any of them are prepared for. The contents of Dalton's lab remain a mystery, but if the truth hidden behind those cold metal doors is as horrifying as Emma believes, then they are no longer players in a personal drama. They have stumbled into something far more systemic, far more insidious. Whether it's illegal experimentation, unauthorized pharmaceutical trials, or classified data tied to government programs, the discovery could unleash a storm that engulfs not only them, but the entire institution of General Hospital. This triad, Emma's relentless pursuit, Joe's self-destructive loyalty, Dante's tormented sense of duty, has created a narrative that is spinning out of control. Each step they take is laced with danger.